Preston Hale crossed an entire ballroom to find her, closed his hand around Nora Vance's wrist, and turned her around like something he still owned. He said it loud enough for 3 tables to hear. "Say hello to my wife, Nora. Sienna knows how to keep a man." He waited for her to shrink. He had rehearsed this, chosen the night, the room, the audience. What he had not planned for was the man standing behind him, the man who owned the ground under all of them and never once raised his voice. Or for Nora, 90 seconds later, kissing that man first. If you want to see exactly how a woman turns the worst night of her life into the night everything changed, subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. Drop the name of the city you are watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled tonight. Nora Vance had been at the Harborline Gala for 41 minutes and she had already decided she was leaving at 9. She had come because her name was on the structural certification and because refusing would have looked like something. She had shaken 11 hands, accepted 2 compliments she did not believe, and spent most of the evening turning a glass in her fingers without drinking from it. She had not expected to see Preston. She had spent 406 days building a life where that was no longer a thing that could happen to her. His hand on her wrist undid all 406 of them in half a second. The grip was not violent. It was worse than violent. It was familiar. It was the exact pressure he used to apply when he wanted her to stop talking at dinner parties. Thumb pressed into the soft place below her palm, a private signal disguised as affection. Her body remembered it before her mind did. Her shoulders dropped an inch, her chin tucked. 27 years of learning to take up less room came back into her spine like a reflex. Then she caught it. She felt herself doing it, and she stopped. She pulled her wrist free, not fast, not dramatic, just a slow, deliberate withdrawal that made him work to keep his smile in place. She turned all the way around to face him, and she made herself look at him the way she looked at a failed load calculation, not with feeling, with attention. He looked good. That was the first insult of the night. Men who did what he did were supposed to look worn down by it, and he never did. He had gained a little weight in a way that suited him. The suit was new, the watch was new, the wife was new. Sienna Marsh was hanging off his left arm, the way a coat hangs off a hook, and she was already smiling before Nora looked at her, a soft, sympathetic smile with the corners turned up too far. The smile of someone who had practiced kindness in a mirror and had not gotten it right. Nora said his name. Just the name. Flat correct with none of the 406 days in it. Preston said he had not expected her here. He said it in a tone that meant he had expected her here, had confirmed it, had checked the guest list. He said he had heard she was still doing the crawl work, still going under piers with a flashlight and a chip hammer, and he asked whether the firm ever let her come up for air. Nora said the crawl work was the work. He laughed. It was a small laugh, warm on the surface, designed to travel. He told the air around them that she had always been like this, that she could never let a compliment land, that this was exactly what he used to deal with at home. And there it was, 60 seconds in, and he had already made her his story instead of a person standing in front of him. Sienna leaned forward and said that Preston had told her so much that she felt like she already knew Nora. She said they had just gotten back from 10 days in Positano, and that the light there did something incredible for the skin. She said Nora should really get out of the city, that it changes you. Nora looked at her and understood something that made her feel almost sorry. Sienna did not know she was a weapon. She thought she was a wife. She had been handed a script, told it was a marriage, and she was performing it in front of an audience she believed she had won. Nora said Positano must have been expensive. Preston's jaw moved. Just once, a tick under the skin. She kept going because the second she stopped, he would fill the space, and she had learned that lesson in a courtroom hallway last spring. She said she was glad the finances had opened up for him. She said she had noticed because the tuition loan for his risk certification was still in her name, still drafting out of her account on the 9th of every month, $382, 41 payments remaining. She said she assumed he had simply forgotten the way people forget things that happen automatically. The silence that followed had a shape to it. 2 people at the nearest table had stopped mid-conversation. Sienna's smile stayed exactly where it was, which was how Nora knew she had not known. Preston recovered fast. He always recovered fast. He said this was why it ended. He said she keeps a ledger of everything she turns love into an invoice, and any man would eventually get tired of being audited. Nora felt the hit land. That was the thing nobody understood about him. He did not lie. He took something true and turned it 40 degrees until it became a flaw. She did keep records. She kept records because she was a forensic engineer and because the last time she had trusted a man's word about money, she had lost $19,000 in a bedroom set. She said nothing. She started to move past him. He stepped sideways and closed the lane. That was the moment the night stopped being ugly and became something else. He physically blocked her exit in a room with 400 people in it, and not one of them said a word, and Nora understood with perfect clarity that he was not going to let her go until he had seen her get smaller. He had not come over to say hello. He had come over to collect something. The evening had been a transaction the whole time, and she was the payment. He raised his voice half a register, pitched it toward the tables, and started talking about how he used to feel guilty. He said he had carried it for months. He said he had lain awake wondering if he had done the wrong thing. He said that seeing her tonight, standing alone in a room like this, with no one on her arm and nothing to show for the years, he finally understood it had been inevitable. He said she was the most talented person he had ever met and the most stuck. He said she measured things instead of building them. He said Sienna had never asked him for a single thing, and that was what a partner looked like. Nora's chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with her lungs, because part of her believed him. That was the poison of it. Standing there with her heart slamming and her ears going hot, some old buried part of her was nodding along, saying, yes, you did measure everything. Yes, you are alone tonight. Yes, look at his hand on her waist and look at your empty hand. She opened her mouth and did not have anything. For the first time all evening, she had nothing. The voice came from behind Preston's right shoulder, and it did not need volume to arrive. It said she was not stuck. It said she was standing still because she was waiting for something to finish rotting on its own. Preston turned around, and Nora watched the color leave his face in real time from the jaw upward, like water draining out of a glass. Matteo Rovelli had not been standing there 30 seconds ago. Nora was certain of that because she had spent the whole exchange tracking every escape route in the room the way she tracked exits in a condemned building. He was simply there now, hands loose at his sides, the least tense man in the entire ballroom, and the space around him had opened up by a foot on all sides without anybody appearing to move. Nora knew the name. Everyone at that gala knew the name. He was on the certification documents she had signed. He was the reason the Port Authority meeting started on time. Nobody in Baltimore said what he was out loud. They said he had interests. They said the harbor ran because he let it run. She had met him exactly once in a conference room for 19 minutes, and he had watched her present load tolerances without blinking, and had asked one question at the end that had been better than any question her own firm had asked in 2 years. He did not look at her now. He looked at Preston with an expression of complete patient boredom. He asked Preston where he worked. Preston said the name of the firm. His voice cracked on the second syllable, and he heard it happen, and it destroyed something in him that his face could not hide. Matteo nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he is being told something he already wrote down. He said he held a position in that firm. He said the number, and the number was large enough that the two people at the nearest table put their drinks down. He said he was curious about something. He said he had watched a grown man cross a room to stand in front of a woman who was not speaking to him, take hold of her arm without permission, and then perform a speech about her failures for an audience. He said he had watched it for 2 full minutes because he wanted to understand what a man gets out of that. Preston started to say it was a misunderstanding. Matteo said it was not. He said misunderstandings happen in a second. He said this took planning. Then he did something Nora did not expect. He turned and asked her whether she wanted him to continue, not whether she was all right, not whether she needed help, whether she wanted him to continue. She had never in her life been asked that. Every man who had ever stepped in front of her had stepped in front of her permanently and called it protection. She said no. She said she would take it from here. Matteo inclined his head about an inch and went quiet and stayed exactly where he was. Nora turned to Preston, and she did not raise her voice at all. She said he had spent 4 years telling her that her work was small. She said the pier they were standing under tonight had a load rating of 11,000 tons and her signature on the certification, and that if she had been wrong about a single number in that file, every person in this room would be in the water. She said that was what measuring was. She said he could call it an invoice if it made him feel taller, but he had spent 4 years living inside things she was responsible for, and he had never once been responsible for anything that could kill someone. She said the loan payment came out on the 9th. She said he should let it keep coming out because it was the only thing he had ever left behind that she could actually use, and she would be filing it as a documented debt in a proceeding he would hear about from a lawyer and not from her. Then she told him to move. He moved. I took Sienna by the elbow, harder than he had ever taken Nora's wrist, and he pulled her toward the doors, and Sienna went with her face frozen in a smile that had stopped meaning anything about 90 seconds earlier. Nora stood there with her heart going like a hammer drill and her hands not shaking, which surprised her, and she thought it was over. Then she saw him stop. Preston stopped at the doors. He did not leave. He turned his head to look back, and Nora knew exactly what that look was because she had lived with him for 4 years, and she had watched him do this 100 times with 100 smaller things. He was checking. He was looking for the crack. He was going to drive home tonight and rebuild the entire evening in his head into a story where the man in the black suit had been a stranger who happened to walk by where Nora had been alone the whole time where he had still won. And by Monday, that version would be the truth. By Monday, he would be telling it at a bar. He would take even this from her. Nora did not think about it. She did not decide. She turned and she took 2 fistfuls of Matteo Ravelli's lapels, and she pulled him down and kissed him. She counted. That was the part she would be ashamed of and proud of in equal measure for the rest of her life. She counted to 3 inside her own head, with her mouth on a man she had spoken to for 19 minutes, because 3 seconds was how long it took a person to be sure of what they were seeing. He did not pull away. He did not grab her either. One hand came up and settled at the base of her spine, steady, not pressing, and he simply let her do it. She let go at 3. Across the room, Preston was still standing in the doorway. He looked like a man watching a building come down. Then he was gone. Nora stepped out. Her ears were roaring. She had just done something in front of 400 people that she could not undo and could not explain, and would be on someone's phone within the hour. Matteo straightened his cuff. He said she had just used him. She said he had been standing there voluntarily. He said that was true. She said she was not going to apologize for it. He said he had not asked her to. Then he said something that made her look up. He said that in 22 years, nobody had ever put a hand on him without permission and walked away without consequence, and that she had done it in front of every person in this city who mattered, and that the whole room now believed something about her that she had not chosen and could not take back. He asked if she understood what she had just spent. Nora said she had spent it on purpose. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Use me again." She asked what that meant. He said she would find out on Monday. He left before she could answer. A wide man in a gray suit peeled off the wall and followed him, and a younger man near the bar, handsome, laughing at something, watched them both go with an expression that lasted less than a second before the laugh came back. Nora stood alone in the middle of the room with her lipstick wrecked and her pulse in her throat and her whole professional life on fire. And she started laughing quietly at nothing because she had never felt anything like it. And then it stopped. Because standing there looking up at the underside of the West span she had certified 9 weeks ago, she remembered what was sitting in her inbox. At 6:40 that morning, she had opened the mill certificates for the West Pier steel. Routine, a closing check she did on every project. She had cross-referenced the heat numbers against the Foundry database because she cross-referenced everything and the numbers had not matched. Not one, not a clerical drift, not a transposition. 41 beams with certificates that pointed to a production run that had never existed. She had told herself it was a database error. She had told herself she would call the Foundry Monday. She had gotten dressed and come to a party. Now she stood underneath 11,000 tons of steel that had her signature on it and someone else's lie inside it in a building owned outright by the man she had just kissed in front of the entire city. She did not sleep. She sat with the certificates open on her laptop until the numbers stopped looking like numbers. And at 4 in the morning, she pulled the original bid file, and that was when it got worse. The steel had been sourced through a supplier named Bloom Metalworks. She had not selected them. Nobody at her firm had selected them. The supplier had been named in the pre-bid risk waiver 11 months before she ever touched the project, and the waiver had been approved by an outside assessor. She scrolled to the signature block and stopped breathing. She read the name 4 times before it stayed in place. Preston Hale. Not a coincidence. Not a variation of the name. His full legal signature, the one she had watched him practice on a napkin the week he passed his certification. The one with the aggressive underline he thought made him look like a man who signed things. Nora closed the laptop. Then she opened it again and screenshotted the page because the first rule of her entire profession was that the record is the only thing that survives. At 8:15, a courier put a folder on her desk. She knew what it was before she opened it because two women from the third floor had already found reasons to walk past her cubicle, and one of them had said good morning in a voice you use at a funeral. The video from the gala had made it around the firm before the coffee finished brewing. The folder held a contract. Russo Harbor Holdings was invoking a clause to restructure the engineering team on the Harbor Line expansion. Her supervisor was being moved to advisory. Nora Vance was named principal engineer of record. The compensation figure at the bottom was more money than she had earned in the last 4 years combined. She sat and looked at it and felt absolutely nothing that resembled joy. Her supervisor, Dale Ferris, appeared in her doorway 40 seconds later, gray in the face holding his own copy. He said congratulations in the way a man says it when someone has taken something off him. He said he did not know how she had managed it. He said it with a very specific emphasis on managed, and he let his eyes go to her mouth for half a second before he caught himself. Nora asked him to repeat the last part. He said nothing. She said she wanted him to say it out loud because if he was going to think it for the next 18 months, she would rather deal with it today. He said he had heard she and Mr. Ravelli were close. She said they had met once for 19 minutes in a room with 6 other people, and that he had been in that room too. She asked him whether he remembered what question Ravelli had asked her at the end of that meeting. Ferris did not remember. She said Ravelli had asked why she had specified a corrosion allowance 40% above code on the tidal splash zone. She said she had told him it was because the code assumed a maintenance schedule the city had not funded since 2011. She said he had written it down. Then she said she was declining the promotion, and she walked past him with the folder under her arm. By 11, she was in the reception area of a building. She had no appointment in telling a woman with a headset that Nora Vance was there to return a contract, and no, she would not be leaving it at the desk. They made her wait 50 minutes. She understood that this was the point. When they finally brought her up, Matteo Ravelli was standing, which surprised her, and he did not offer her a chair, which did not. She put the folder on his desk and slid it toward him and said she was not taking it. He asked why. She said because a job you are handed can be taken back, and she had spent 4 years living inside something she did not own, and she was not doing it again with a building. He said that was a very expensive principle. She said it was the only one she had left that had not been on sale. He looked at her for a while. Then he opened a drawer and took out a stack of paper and set it down and told her to read it. It was hers, 2 years old. A memo she had written to Dale Ferris about splice plate tolerances on a warehouse conversion. The one that had gotten her told she was difficult. The one that had been buried so thoroughly, she had assumed no copy existed outside her own hard drive. Underneath it was another, and another. 9 memos. Every fight she had ever lost inside her own firm in order with dates. She asked how he had gotten them. He said he had asked for the file of every engineer who had signed anything on his waterfront in the last 6 years, and that 11 names had come back clean, and one name had come back with a paper trail of people telling her to stop noticing things. He said he was not giving her a gift. He said he had $100 million of exposure sitting on pilings, and he wanted the only person in the city who had ever been punished for being right. Nora felt something crack open in her chest, and she shut it immediately because a compliment from a man like that was still a hand on her wrist if she let it be. She said she believed him. Then she said she was still not signing that contract. She took the folder back, uncapped a pen, and started crossing out clauses. She struck the section that gave his office approval over material substitutions. She struck the clause rooting her testing through a lab he held a stake in. She wrote in her own handwriting that she alone held unilateral stopwork authority that no representative of Russo Harbor Holdings would set foot on the site during active inspection, that the independent laboratory would be chosen by her from a list she had not shown him, and that termination required cause documented in writing and reviewable by a third party. She turned it around and told him that was the version she would sign. He read it. It took him a long time. Then he asked whether she understood that she had just written a contract in which she could shut down his construction site and he could not shut down her. She said yes. He asked what would stop her from doing it exactly that. She said nothing would. She said that was the entire point of it. He picked up his own pen and signed at the bottom without changing a word. And she noticed because she noticed everything that his hand paused for a fraction of a second before it touched the paper. He said nobody had ever handed him terms before. She said that was probably a problem he should look into. She was almost at the door when she stopped and turned around because she had come here to do two things and had almost let the second one go. She asked him if he knew where his West Pier steel came from. He said Bloom Metal Works out of Sparrows Point. She asked how long. He said 4 years. She told him the mill certificates were fabricated. She said it flatly the way she would say a beam was undersized because there was no other way to say it that would survive contact with a man like him. 41 members on the west span with heat numbers pointing to a production run that never happened. He did not react at all, which frightened her more than shouting would have. He asked if she was certain. She said no. She said she was certain the paperwork was fraudulent. She said she would not be certain about the steel until she pulled physical cores and that she was not going to accuse a supplier of putting bad metal into a public pier on the strength of a spreadsheet. He asked what she needed. She said access a drill rig 6 weeks and for him not to touch it. He said that last part was going to be difficult for him. She said she was aware. The next 11 days broke Preston Hale into pieces, and Nora watched it happen from a distance without ever asking for it. I was terminated on a Tuesday. No cause given, no severance discussion. A cardboard box and a security escort out through the lobby where he had once made her wait 40 minutes because he did not want his colleagues to see her in work boots. 3 firms he called did not call back. A fourth called back to say they were passing. His credit line was pulled by a bank that had never once questioned him. Nora heard all of it secondhand and felt none of the things she had imagined feeling. She had rehearsed this in the shower for a year. Now it was happening and it was just weather. He caught her in the parking garage under her building on a Thursday night. He came out from behind a column and she had her keys through her knuckles before she consciously recognized him, and that reflex, that automatic body knowledge of how to hold keys, made her angrier than anything he said. He looked terrible, not tragic, cheap, like a suit that had been rained on and hung up wrong. He said she had to talk to Ravelli. She said no. He said he had lost everything, that Sienna had packed a bag on Sunday, that her sister had come with a car that she had not answered a call since. Nora said that was between him and Sienna. He said Nora had done this. He said she had brought a monster to a party and pointed him at a man whose only crime was a bad marriage. She said his only crime was not a bad marriage, and she watched his face when she said it, and she saw it. A flicker, fast and then buried. He knew what she meant. He had already been afraid of something before tonight, and he had been hoping she had not gotten there yet. She asked him about the risk waiver. He said he did not know what she was talking about. She said the pre-bid waiver on the Harbor Line West Pier dated March of the year before last naming Bloom Metalworks as approved sole source with his signature on the assessor line. He said he had signed 200 waivers that year. She said that was interesting because she had not told him which project she meant until after he said it. That was when he grabbed her, both hands high on her arms, and he shoved her back into the concrete hard enough that her shoulder blade hit first and the pain went white for a second. His face came in close and everything performative went out of it, and what was underneath was pure animal fear. He said she had no idea what she was standing on top of. He said she should let it go. He said the words "let it go" 3 times in a row, like a man trying to convince himself. Then a hand came out of the dark and took him off her. Casimir did not hit him. He put one hand on the back of Preston's neck and moved him 8 feet sideways into the concrete and held him there, and the ease of it, the absolute lack of effort, was the most humiliating thing that had ever happened to Preston Hale in a life that had recently contained a great deal of humiliation. Casimir said something quiet about hands. Nora said his name and told him to let go. He did not move. She said it again and said that this was her building and her garage and her ex-fiancé, and that she was not going to have a conversation finished for her by somebody else's employee in her own parking structure. Casimir looked at her for 2 full seconds, and then he let go and stepped back exactly 1 pace, which was as much as he was going to give her. Preston slid partway down the wall and stayed there breathing hard. Nora crouched down so she was level with him, which she had never done for him in 4 years, and she said the only thing is she had come down here with. She said he was not going to prison because of a party. She said he was going to prison because 11 months before she ever touched that project, he had put his name on a document that let bad steel into a public structure, and that she had already sent copies of it to 3 places he would never find. She said she was not doing this to hurt him. She said she was doing it because 41 beams were holding up something people were going to walk on, and that if he had told her if he had picked up a phone at any point in 4 years and told her, she would have fixed it and protected him and never said a word. She said the thing she could not forgive was not the affair. It was that he had known what was in that steel and he had let her sign her name under it. He started crying. It was ugly and it was real, and for 1 second she recognized him. Then he said through it that she did not understand that he had not chosen Bloom, that somebody had told him which name to put on the waiver, and that he had been paid $11,000 to not ask why. She asked who. He said he could not. She said a name. He said the name would kill him. She stood up. She said he had exactly one thing left to sell, and he was going to sell it eventually, and she would rather he sold it to a prosecutor than to whoever had bought him the first time. She walked to her car. Her hands started shaking somewhere around the door handle, and she sat in the driver's seat for 6 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. Casimir was still standing where she had left him. She rolled the window down and told him that she needed a favor that was not a favor from his employer. He waited. She said she wanted to know who paid Bloom Metalworks, not who Bloom sold to, who paid them. He said that was not a question she should be asking a man who worked for Matteo Ravelli. She said that was exactly why she was asking him. 4 days later, she got what she asked for, and it did not come from Casimir. It came from the foundry's own accounts receivable, pulled it legitimately through a subpoena her attorney filed on a completely unrelated payment dispute, because Nora Vance had learned in a courtroom hallway last spring that the boring door is usually unlocked. Bloom Metalworks had received payments from 3 shell entities across 4 years. She traced all 3. 2 dissolved into nothing. The third had a filing agent, and the filing agent had a client list, and on that client list was a management company that held the operating lease on 2 Russo Harbor terminals. She sat with it for an hour. Then she pulled the signature page on that management company's registration and read the name of the officer of record and understood that the money had never been flowing into the harbor at all. It had been flowing out of it. The name on the page was Enzo Rovelli. The federal office called her back at 7:40 the next morning, and the woman on the phone did not sound impressed until Nora said the words, 39 sealed cores with unbroken custody, and then the woman's voice changed and she asked Nora to hold. Nora had not called the city. That was deliberate, and it was the single smartest thing she did in the entire matter. The city had approved the waiver. The city, had accepted the certificates. The city had issued the stop work order off an anonymous complaint in under 36 hours, when it had taken them 9 months to fix a traffic light on Boston Street. She did not know who inside that building had been bought, and she was not going to find out by handing them the file. The federal team arrived on Thursday. There were 4 of them, and none of them cared who Matteo Ravelli was, which Nora found enormously relaxing. Matteo did not make it easy on himself. He could have lawyered the whole thing into a 2-year fog. Instead, he sat in a conference room for 6 hours and answered questions about his own leases, and when they asked him for the operating agreements on Terminals 4 and 9, he told his counsel to produce them unredacted, and his counsel actually said his name out loud in a tone of open disbelief. Nora was not in the room for that. She heard about it later. What she saw was what it cost him. Enzo came to the office 2 days after, and he did not come angry. That was what made it unbearable to watch. He came in smiling. He kissed his cousin on both cheeks. He called him by a name from childhood, and he sat down and asked what all this nonsense was about. And for 11 minutes, he was warm and funny and the most likable person in the building. Matteo let him finish. Then he asked Enzo one question. He asked whether Enzo remembered the night of the accident, the year Matteo was 11, when Enzo's mother had put a plate in front of him and told him he was not a visitor in her house. Enzo said of course he remembered. Matteo said he had spent 31 years paying that debt and had never once resented it, and that he would have given Enzo the terminals outright if he had asked, and that the only thing he had ever needed in return was to not be made a fool of in his own harbor. Enzo's face changed by degrees. First the smile went, then the warmth. and what was underneath was somebody Nora would have crossed a street to avoid. He said Mateo had been made a fool of by a woman with a clipboard, not by family. Mateo said the woman with the clipboard was the only person in 4 years who had bothered to read anything. Enzo said something in Italian low and fast, and Matteo answered him in English, which was its own kind of answer, and said that the federal team had a list of questions and that his counsel would provide contact information. Enzo stood up. He said Matteo would not survive giving up blood. He said half the men who worked that waterfront worked it because of the name, and the name meant you were not for sale and that Matteo was about to find out how quickly 100 people can decide they never knew him. He was not wrong. Inside a month, Matteo lost two terminal operators, a customs broker who had been with his father and the man who ran the longshore local, who did not stop taking his calls but stopped returning them, which was worse. There was a dinner in Little Italy he was not invited to for the first time in 19 years. Somebody put a dead thing on the hood of Casimir's car, which Casimir found insulting, mostly because of the choice of car. Nora asked him once whether he regretted it. He said he regretted that it had taken a stranger to make him look. He said that was the part he would not get over. Preston's attorney tried to flip it in October. Nora had expected desperation. She had not expected the shape of it. The defense filing asserted that Nora Vance's principal engineer of record had originated the fraudulent certificates, had substituted the material to protect a construction schedule that benefited her personally, and had constructed the entire custody chain after the fact once exposure became inevitable. It named her relationship with Matteo Ravelli in the second paragraph. It attached a screenshot from the gala. Her own attorney called it aggressive. Nora called it what it was, which was a man reaching for the last tool he had ever known how to use, which was making people believe her account of her own life was unreliable. The deposition ran 9 hours. They came at her with the video first. They asked whether she had initiated physical contact with the principal investor in a public setting. They asked how long the two had been involved prior to her appointment as engineer of record. They asked whether she had ever received compensation gifts or travel from Russo Harbor Holdings. She answered every question. She did not get defensive, and she did not get cute, because she had learned from her own expert testimony work that the moment you start performing innocence, you have already conceded the frame. Then they made a mistake. Preston's attorney asked her to confirm that she could not produce a single document predating the fire that established the certificates were fraudulent. Nora asked for the exhibit binder. She said she could produce 11. She walked them through it, and she did not hurry, because the whole point of what she did for a living was that the boring part is where the truth lives. She had a screenshot of the Foundry database mismatch with an embedded timestamp of 6:41 on the morning of the gala, taken before she had ever spoken to Matteo Ravelli that year. She had the courier receipts, 9 of them each, showing a package weight consistent with sealed core tubes dated across the coring period. She had the Philadelphia Labs intake photographs of every seal unbroken, initialed across the tape, with her initials on the tape in her actual handwriting, which she then placed beside the erection log, initials at 400% magnification, and asked the room to look at the downstroke pressure. She had the metallurgical results: 39 samples, 22 conforming, 17 with yield strength between 19 and 31% below specification, in members she could name by grid coordinate. And she had the risk waiver. She put it in front of him and asked him to read the assessor's signature into the record. His attorney objected. The objection did not matter, because everyone in that room had already watched Preston Hale look at his own name and go the color of paper. She said the last part quietly, and it was the only moment all day she let anything into her voice. She said he had spent 4 years telling her that keeping records was a character defect. She said he had called it an invoice. She said the records were the only reason she was sitting on this side of the table. They took a break. Preston did not come back for 11 minutes. Sienna Marsh came in on a Tuesday alone and asked to speak to the investigators without an attorney, which everyone told her not to do. Nora met her in the hallway afterward, and neither of them knew what to do with their hands. Sienna said she had not come to apologize because she did not think an apology was worth anything to a person who had watched her stand there in that ballroom and smile. Nora said that was probably correct. Sienna said she had come because she had opened a piece of mail in June addressed to her from a bank she had never heard of, about a line of credit she had never applied for, secured against a car she did not know was in her name. She said she had asked him about it, and he had explained it so patiently and so completely that she had apologized to him. She said she had apologized to him for asking. She said there were 4 accounts. She said her signature was on all of them, and she had signed exactly none of them, and that the signature was very good, better than good, and that he must have practiced. Nora said he had. She said he practiced signatures. She said she had watched him do it on a napkin once and had thought it was charming. Sienna said the thing that finally cracked her was smaller than the money. She said he had started asking her to text him when she left the house. Just so I know, he said. Just so I know you got there. And then it was where, and then it was who with, and then it was a phone call. If she took too long in a grocery store, and she had described all of it to her sister as being cared about, and her sister had gone quiet on the phone in a way she had not understood until August. Nora said her sister had gone quiet because she recognized it. Sienna asked whether he had done it to her too. Nora said yes. She said the exact same sequence in the exact same order, and that hearing it from someone else was the first time she had understood it had never been about her at all. She had thought for 4 years that she had brought it out in him, that she was too much, too precise, too hard to reassure. And she was standing in a hallway listening to a 26-year-old describe her own marriage word for word, which meant it had been a method the whole time, a thing he did, a thing he would have done to anyone. Sienna started crying and apologized for crying, and Nora told her to stop apologizing for things that were happening in her own body. Neither woman said a single unkind thing about the other. Nora thought about that for weeks afterward. The entire architecture of what he had built required them to hate each other, and it took about 90 seconds in a hallway for the whole thing to come down. Preston pleaded in January. Federal charges: fraud in connection with materials supplied to a federally funded marine terminal, falsification of records, arson of a structure containing evidence, and 4 counts of identity fraud added after Sienna's statement, which she gave twice on record without ever once softening it. Enzo Rovelli did not plead. Enzo Rovelli left the country on a Wednesday, and there is a sealed indictment sitting in Baltimore with his name on it and a red notice attached, and Matteo has said publicly and privately that he does not know where he is, and Nora believes him about that mostly. Curtis Bloom was indicted with 11 counts, and his company went into receivership, and the receiver hired an outside engineer to review 4 years of shipments to 9 other structures. The outside engineer they hired was Nora Vance. That was the part nobody had planned. Russo Harbor Holdings offered to fund the West Span remediation out of pocket immediately, quietly on Matteo's signature alone. It would have been the fastest way. It would have had the site running again by March. Nora said no. She said if he wrote a check, the story in every trade publication, in every bar on that waterfront would be that the mob had paid to make it go away, and her name would be attached to that sentence for the rest of her working life. She spent 6 weeks doing something far less dramatic and far harder. She restructured the remediation as a joint venture, brought in a state infrastructure trust as a co-obligor with audit rights, and forced a public materials verification protocol into the contract that gave an independent lab veto authority over every load delivered. She sat in 11 meetings with people who did not want her there. She lost 2 of the things she asked for. The site reopened in April under a contract that no longer allowed anyone, including Matteo Rovelli, to be the reason anything happened. Her firm offered her partnership. She declined that too. Dale Ferris asked her what she wanted genuinely, and she told him she wanted the 9 memos he had buried put back into the record with their original dates, and he did it, and then she resigned anyway. Matteo asked her near the end of all of it whether she wanted him to keep men on her building. She thought about it for a long time because there was a version of her that wanted it very badly. She said she did not want a fortress. She said she had lived in a fortress and the door had opened from the outside. He pulled them that night. All of them. Casimir told her later, and grudgingly, that it was the only order he had ever considered refusing. The first night without them, Nora slept badly, and it had nothing to do with fear. It was the silence of it. For 7 months, there had been a car on her street and a man in her lobby, and the particular comfort of knowing that if something went wrong, someone would arrive. Now there was nobody, and she lay awake at 2 in the morning realizing that she had gotten used to being watched over and had almost let herself call it being loved. She got up at 5 and did what she always did when a thing was too big to feel. She opened a spreadsheet. She had $11,000 in savings a suspended license that had been reinstated with a written finding of no fault that nobody had bothered to publicize, and a resume that in certain rooms in Baltimore now read as either the most credible engineer on the Eastern Seaboard or a woman who had blown up $100 million project because of a man. She started the company anyway. Vance Forensic LLC. She filed it herself online for $130, and she sat there afterward feeling ridiculous because the entire thing had taken 9 minutes, and the last 4 years had taken 4 years. The Bloom receivership contract was her first client. 9 structures, a parking deck in Owings Mills, 2 school gymnasiums, a fire station, an overpass in Cecil County, and 4 warehouse conversions. She found substandard material in 6 of the 9. The parking deck was the one that stayed with her. Ninth-grade basketball games had been played under one of those gymnasium roofs for 3 years. A fire station with a bay door header 19% under spec had been dispatching engines out of it since 2019. Nobody had died. That was luck. That was not engineering. That was luck. And Nora sat in her car outside the fire station with the numbers on her lap and shook for 10 minutes because it was the first time she had let herself understand how close it had all been. She wrote the report. It was 240 pages. She did not soften a single sentence. Then the state called her. The Maryland legislature had a bill in front of it on material certification, and somebody in a subcommittee had read her report and they wanted her to testify. Her attorney told her it was a bad idea. Testifying meant hostile questions about the gala video, about Mateo, about a relationship half of Annapolis had opinions about. Nora said yes in about 4 seconds. She testified on a Tuesday in February for 3 hours and 11 minutes. The third question in was exactly what her attorney had predicted. A delegate from the Eastern Shore asked her in a tone of great concern whether her professional judgment had been compromised by her personal association with a party under federal investigation. Nora had prepared 4 different answers. She used none of them. She said she would answer that honestly if he would let her. She said yes, her judgment had been compromised for 4 years, but not by the man he met. She said she had been engaged to a risk assessor who told her every week that her thoroughness was a personality problem, and she had believed him enough to stop sending memos for almost a year, and that in that year a supplier put 17 defective members into a public peer. She said the compromise was not a man she kissed at a party. The compromise was a decade of being told that women who check things are difficult. The room went quiet in a way that made the chairman clear his throat. She said the bill in front of them did not need to be about her. She said it needed to require independent verification of mill certificates on any publicly funded structure chain of custody logging, on physical samples and legal protection for any engineer who issues a stop work order that turns out to be wrong. She said that last one mattered most because nobody stops a job when being wrong ends your career, and the whole system was currently designed to make sure the person with the most information had the most to lose by using it. The bill passed in April with the verification protocol and the custody requirement intact. The stop work protection got stripped in committee and put back on the floor by a delegate from Dundalk, whose father had been a longshoreman, and she voted for it while saying Nora's name out loud into a microphone. The trade press started calling the protocol the Vance Standard. Nora hated it. She said so publicly twice, and it did not help, and eventually she stopped fighting it because she realized the only thing worse than her name on it was nobody's. Sienna came to the office in May. Nora was working out of a rented room above a marine supply store with 1 desk and a folding table, and Sienna stood in the doorway holding a folder and looking like she wanted to leave. She said she was not there for money, and she was not there to be forgiven. She said she had a bachelor's in communications and 18 months of experience, answering phones and a bankruptcy filing, and that every place she applied looked her up and found the deposition and stopped calling. She said she needed a job and she knew this was insane and she was going to ask anyway. Nora looked at her for a long moment. Then she asked her one question. She asked whether Sienna had ever at any point during those months opened a document she had been told not to open. Sienna said yes. She said in September she had gone through the desk in the spare room because she could not sleep, and she had photographed 40 pages and she still had them. Nora hired her that afternoon, not out of kindness. She said that out loud because she wanted it to be true, and she wanted Sienna to hear it. She said a woman who goes through a locked desk at 3 in the morning and photographs 40 pages is exactly the kind of person you want handling document control, and that forgiveness was worth nothing, and a salary was worth $1,400 every 2 weeks. Sienna cried in the bathroom for 11 minutes and came out and started building a filing system, and inside a year she was managing custody logging for every active file in the company and had gotten better at it than Nora had ever been. They never became close. That was the honest part. They worked 12 feet apart for years, and there was always a wall, and neither of them pretended otherwise. But once at a deposition prep, opposing counsel referred to Sienna as the assistant, and Nora corrected him twice, and the second time she did it slowly. Preston was sentenced in June, 51 months. He sent her a letter in August, 11 pages handwritten. Nora read the first page standing at her mailbox. It opened with an apology that was actually about him, moved into an explanation of the pressures he had been under, and by the bottom of the page had arrived at a paragraph about how she had never really seen him. She did not read the other 10. She did not burn it either, because that would have been a gesture, and gestures were his medium, not hers. She put it in a drawer. Then she sat down and thought about the things she had not let herself think about for 2 years, which was that he had recommended her, that he had sat in a bar in Fells Point and offered up the woman he was going to marry as the engineer who could be counted on to be too careful to be suspected and too junior to be believed. He had known exactly who she was. He had described her accurately. He had used the accurate description as a weapon. And she understood, finally standing in her own office, with her own name on the door, that the reason it had worked was that he had been right about everything except the last part. She had been thorough. She had been too junior to be listened to. She had just refused to stay that way. Mateo asked her to dinner in September, and she said no. She said no in October too. Not because she did not want to, because she had spent 18 months rebuilding a life on low paths she had calculated herself, and she was not going to put the whole thing on a foundation she had not tested. He did not push. That was the thing about him she had never been able to explain to anyone. He asked, she said no, and he did not ask again for 6 weeks, and when he did ask, he asked exactly the same way, without a single ounce of pressure attached. He came to the office in November with a folder. She braced for it. She had been braced for it for 2 years, waiting for the moment a man like that decided to solve her. It was not a ring. It was not a check. It was an operating agreement. Han had spent 14 months restructuring. Terminals 4 and 9 had been folded into a public benefit entity with a state audit seat. 2 of his holding companies had been dissolved and their assets moved into a registered logistics corporation with published beneficial ownership and a compliance officer he did not control. He had shed 60% of his cash flow doing it. Casimir had told her that number once and had not been happy about it. The agreement in the folder was for a joint venture on the North Waterfront, and her name was on the partner line, not consultant, not engineer of record. Partner with a capital position and a signature requirement. She read all of it. It took her 40 minutes. He waited. She said he had structured it so he could not remove her. He said that was correct. She asked why. And Matteo Ravelli said the only sentence he had ever said to her that she thought about years later. He said he had spent his whole life making sure nothing could be taken from him, and it had turned him into a man whose own cousin robbed him for 4 years, and that she had walked into his life and handed him back a contract with his own clauses crossed out. And that was the first time anyone had ever made him safer by refusing him. He said he did not want to own her. He said he wanted to be on the same side of the table. She signed it. She did not marry him that year or the next. When they did eventually, it was at the courthouse on a Thursday with Casimir and Sienna as witnesses and no photographs. And the trade press found out 4 months later and got the date wrong. The North Waterfront opened in the spring of the 3rd year. Nora was at the reception because her name was on the structural certification and because this time she wanted to be. She had 11 people working for her by then, and 3 of them were in the room. She was near the center of it when she heard the tone. She knew it before she heard the words. Every woman in that room knew it before she heard the words. A senior principal from a firm she had bid against, 58 years old, holding a drink, standing over a young engineer named Priya Rahavan, who had flagged a connection detail during the review and had been right about it. I was telling her warmly in front of 5 people that she was going to learn the difference between theory and construction. He was saying that everyone starts out wanting to be the smartest person in the room. He was saying that she should be careful about how she came across because reputation in this town is built early. Priya was smiling and her jaw was locked, and she had gotten about half an inch shorter. Nora crossed the room. She did not raise her voice. She had learned a long time ago that the volume is never the thing. She said Priya had flagged an eccentric connection at grid F14 during the 60% review, and that the connection as detailed had a demand-to-capacity ratio of 1.14, and that it had been corrected because she flagged it. She said the man's own firm had reviewed that same drawing set and had not caught it. She said that everyone in this room signs things that hold people up, and that the young woman he was correcting was the reason nobody was going to find out what a 1.14 looks like in February with a full crowd on it. Then she said the last thing, and she said it to him, but she said it looking at Priya. She said the difference between theory and construction is that in construction, being difficult is the job. Nobody said anything for about 3 seconds. The man laughed the way men laugh when they have decided to survive a moment, and said something about the younger generation and moved off toward the bar. And Priya Raghavan stood there with her eyes bright and her chin up and did not get any shorter for the rest of the night. Matteo was standing 20 feet away the entire time. He had not moved. He had not stepped in. He had not looked for Casimir. He had watched a woman fix a thing in a room he owned without him, and he was smiling in a way almost nobody had ever seen on that face, because the most dangerous person in the room was not him anymore, and he had known it for years, and it had never once bothered him. Nora found him afterward. He asked if she was all right. She said she was. He asked if she wanted to go home. She said, in a minute, she said she wanted to go look at F14 first. And she went in a $500 dress and flat shoes she had chosen on purpose. And she stood under a corrected connection with her hands in her pockets and looked up at the things she had built and the things she had caught, and understood that this was what the whole story had been about the entire time. Nobody rescued Nora Vance. She read the drawings, she kept the records, she sealed the samples, she walked out of the fire, carrying the evidence herself, and every single person who tried to make her smaller is now a footnote in a building that will outlive all of them. If you believe the sweetest revenge is becoming impossible to replace, tell me the city you are watching from in the comments and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one.